Good evening, and welcome to the second annual Black Fine Art Month celebration. This year we celebrate Black women artists under the theme, A Woman's Work. So I invite you to call everyone that you know. Tell them to hashtag us at hashtag PigmentINTL or hashtag Black Fine Art Month.
I'm a Chicago-based artist. This month is Black Fine Arts Month. The exhibit for Pigment International this month is called A Woman's Work. Pieces I have in this show are Everything Originates from Her and Pink Moisturizer. I was raised by a bevy of Black women. Outside of my father and my uncle, these were like the main male figures in my life. And then there were dozens and dozens of Black female hands that raised me. And everything that nurtured me and everything that is good within me came from them. So these pieces sort of resonate and speak to them. She's originally from Louisiana, now living in the Chicagoland region. He works next to me and behind me. These are oil paintings. Some are on linen, some are on panel. Little known fact, Karen uses her daughters as models. I've been to her studio before and she'll do these renditions in graphite and charcoal. And she'll use all these different mediums until she works up to a composition that she really loves, right before she does these beautiful oil paintings. Karen Hobson is amazing.
Pope. Welcome to Black Fine Art Month. This is my painting. It's called Because Being Black in a White Space is a Real Thing. And you may have seen one similar to it at the Rare Art Auction last month. It is just speaking to how difficult it can be to be Black in white spaces. The microaggressions that we face, the little mini the situations that we come across constantly where we're maligned and left to feel like it's something wrong with us, like we don't go with everything else. One of these things just doesn't belong here. And so I started this series about a year ago. He is number 6 in the series, and it's, I think it's really resonating with people, especially people who work in corporate, people who have children who go to school in predominantly white spaces, like my son. Find out more about me on my website, www.danatapo.com, and that's it.
I'm staring through your window, looking up at the stars, up at the stars. I'm caught inside a loop where I can get to your heart, get to your heart. Ooh, you're letting your fears take hold, let them take control, and it's making me crazy. If you could only look at me, you know how I feel, know how I feel. Oh, see how how much I want it, see how bad I need it. You gotta look into my eyes.
I'm Gerald Griffin. Welcome to Gerald Griffin Gallery. Standing next to one of my medium-sized paintings, a piece called Tiana 2. And we're celebrating Black Artist Month with Pigment International and featuring works of some of the great artists of Pigment here in my gallery. A little bit about this piece. It is an original oil on wood, so this is a large wood panel that this is painted on. And it's based on a poem that I wrote called Tiana 2, which was inspired by another piece I did called Breakfast at Tiana's, which is kind of a parody. Both of the pieces are a parody on the iconic Audrey Hepburn Breakfast at Tiffany's piece, but reimagining that idea as a young Black woman. Right next to the painting happens to be the poem, and I can read it for you. Here it is. It's Tiana 2. Black girls scream through Audrey Hepburn dreams with hopes of the finer things of living the highbrow life. But that black body is killing she, as she longs to be Breakfast at Tiffany, or maybe a rich man's wife. His history has told her she's nothing but a soldier, and all she can hope for is to stand beside a man. Black and a woman too, that's double servitude. They put it in the rules, and they made her understand. But that effigy is a lie. She was the first to fly, the original queen on high, with ruby slippers and all. They don't want to let her loose, because when she learns the truth, that she is Tiffany too, then all her limits will fall. So the piece is part of this series that I created called Paradigm Shift, and the idea is to embrace our history as the African American collective, but to also grow and move beyond the limited scope of what that history is, because as people, our history is rich. It's much bigger than our experience in the United States, and as people, our expressions are much bigger than that. So Tiana represents that expansion of who we are and what we can be.
Yo.
Hi, I am Kaya Johnson. I am a fine arts photographer. I am super excited to be a part of Black Fine Art Month. And I think even more so amongst other women who are participating as well. I think it's necessary, and our voices being elevated this way today on the south side of Chicago is pretty amazing. As far as practice, I am a self-taught photographer. And I think that more so means that I consider myself a storyteller, but I had to find out the technology of the camera to really make it work for storytelling when it comes to still photography. The pieces you see here today were handpicked by Paul Branton. He wanted pieces that reflected the artist, as well as their voice, as well as a platform and the medium that they use. And so he brilliantly handpicked all of these pieces, which are different women from different walks of life from the south side of Chicago.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Austin, and welcome to the fourth installment of Black Fine Arts Month Salon Talks, hosted by Pigment International and the DuSable Museum of African American History and New Day Culture. Our talk today will be centered around documenting the Black art experience. We are asking our viewers to join us in discussing how we are researching and recording Black art as Black women. What we know for sure is that having critique from a Black perspective is important, and each one of our panelists is essential to telling the story of the origins, development, and future of Black art. Currently, I'm the Director of Content Development for New Day Culture, an organization that sits at the intersection of museums and technology. At our most basic level, New Day serves as an archive, allowing the public to access content from museums all over the world in an easy and digestible format. But while collecting this content, we noticed a dearth of online programming within the collections of Black museums and organizations. Something that was a commodity last year is now essential to surviving the current pandemic. This made us question, how can we work to ensure that the work of Black history and scholarship is documented, retained, and sent back out into the world in the times of COVID? We knew we weren't prepared to answer this on our own, so we partnered with the Association of African American Museums, where I also sit on the Emerging Professionals Committee, and I've been working to create in-kind digital content for member organizations in an attempt to ensure that our work is documented for future generations. One of the projects I've been working on is with the Black Lives Matter street murals that have been installed across the US this summer. More than just documenting the creation, I've sat down with many of the artists, collected interviews, and allowed them to speak on their work and the whys behind the movement. Here is a short clip of an interview hosted at the Madam Walker Legacy Center here in Indianapolis, a stronghold of Black culture within our city.
My idea of beauty and, knowing that you can kind of shape and mold that to be whatever you want it to be in that moment. So I did the letter A in Black. So the first A, the idea behind my letter was, I started with Maya Angelou's poem, And Still I Rise. And I just feel like that poem is so insanely powerful, and it just resonates with, not just Black women, but women in general. Just, the way that poem, you feel it, And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to do something a little more hopeful for the street mural.
So that's just a short clip of the upcoming documentary that will be released at the end of this month from New Day Culture. This interview, along with the rest of the Indianapolis team, the team from Harlem, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Charlotte, North Carolina, Chicago, Illinois, Annapolis, Maryland, and Palo Alto, California, will integrate it into a large-scale projection project of the murals that will travel throughout 6 major cities in the United States, expected to reach an audience of nearly 1.5 million people over the next 3 years. This serves not only to promote the artists and their messages as they are living, but to record them so their permeance in the longer course of art history. This idea of permeance is also a fundamental reason for the creation of Fine Arts Month, Black Fine Arts Month, and is a centering point that all of the scholars on our panel have in common. How can we create longevity and legacy through documentation? And with that, I will introduce our illustrious panel. Patricia Andrews-Keenan is the founder of Pigment International, a multimedia arts collective redefining global culture and innovation. The organization is committed to creating new platforms for the advancement of the modern multicultural aesthetic in the visual arts, specifically the aesthetic represented by African artists. Pigment serves as a connector for emerging creators, collectors, curators, and other stakeholders. This collective led to the founding of Pigment magazine and Black Fine Month in 2019. Pigment magazine was 2018. Andrew-Keenan's background encompasses stints as a journalist, a PR manager, a government affairs director, and communications and corporate affairs executive with media companies, and includes the creation of the boutique communications firm, the Tallulah Group, in 2008. It's very nice to talk with you again, Patricia.
Thank you, Kayla.
No problem. Up next is Myrtis, is the founding director of Galerie Myrtis, a contemporary fine art gallery and advisory that specializes in 20th and 21st century American art with a focus on rated by African American artists. The gallery opened its doors in 2006 to utilize the visual arts to create awareness for artists who deserve for the contributions and artistically portray our culture, our cultural, social, historical, and political landscapes, and to recognize art movements that paved the way for artistic expression. All right, nice to sit down and talk with you today, Myrtis.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Up next is Dr. Morgan. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Dr. Kelly Moore, curator, author, educator, and social justice activist. She earned her doctorate in Afro-American Studies and a graduate certificate in public history and museum studies from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Specializing in critical race and curatorial analysis, her interdisciplinary research focuses on Black women's visual narratives. Most recently, her work has demonstrated how traditional art history and museum practices uphold white supremacy and maintain white cultural hegemony. Held curatorial positions at the Birmingham Museum, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, where she recontextualized the American collections to illuminate systematic racism and structural inequalities in order to encourage responsible approaches to museum initiatives. Currently, Dr. Morgan is an independent curator and art consultant. Nice to sit with you again, Dr. Morgan.
Good to see you, Kayla. Thanks for having me.
Halima Taha is an arts professional, curatorial and art advisory, strategic planning, and professional speaker services, develop corporate, academic, and civic programs and offices. Halima is best known for her groundbreaking bestseller, Collecting African American Art, Works on Paper and Canvas, the first book to validate collecting fine art, printmaking, and photography by members of African descent as an asset and a commodity. Her work provided the foundation in conjunction with the Black Fine Arts Show, 1997 to 2007, for cultivating and educating the market that enabled Swan Galleries to establish the first African American auction category within an international in 2008. Collect African American art works on paper was used as a choice member incentive for PBS, raising 3 times its fund goal. This work provided solid market criteria for publishers to print more artist monograms about Black artists and collections independent of museum shows within the first 2 decades of the 21st century. The work also encouraged national and international museums to pursue private collections of American art for exhibition, including the collections of Pamela Joyner, Fred Gufida, David and Thelma Driscoll, Miss Wes and Misty Cochran, Karen and C. Betty Davis, amongst many others. Who would join us today, Halima.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
You too. And then before we get started with the discussion today, we are going to switch Patricia and allow her to introduce Pigment magazine.
Certainly. Thank you, Kayla. I'll give you a little bit of background on the magazine and how we got started. It all began with Pigment, the collective. That was founded in 2018 after a visit to Art Basel. We have a great team that worked on that. Phyllis North and Devorah Crable joined me and bought into the idea of working with the artists to create something to give them more visibility, to help spur their careers. And we're talking about mid-career and emerging artists. After going to Art Basel, we saw where there was something lacking. If you weren't at a very high level in the arts, many times you didn't have an opportunity to show work or talk about what you were doing. And the skills that we had, media, PR, marketing, seemed to fit very well in helping the artists that we were working with here in Chicago expand their practice and share more about themselves in the world. Until someone writes about you or tells your story, there is no way to track your progress in the art world. Being here in Chicago, it's such a epicenter for things. I had spent a lot of time on the board of the Southside Community Arts Center, so I knew that history of an 80-year-old organization where artists like Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, and Dr. Margaret Burroughs had come through beginning in the 40s. I also had worked with a lot of organizations doing media and PR that were focused on the arts. And I had been an art collector myself from my youngest days, when I could buy posters and I would go to flea markets and things and find things with our images. So for me, it was about seeing more of that and telling more of those stories. I think at the heart of everything for Pigment, the magazine, it was about storytelling and how can we tell the stories of these artists. So we started Pigment in 2018, and we were working with artists. We were showcasing their work. We were going to companies and showcasing, doing exhibits for them, but realizing that we also needed to tell these stories and show this work. We came up with the idea for the magazine. I myself was a journalism major in school. I went to an HBCU, Grambling State University. So I was accustomed to writing things in my corporate positions, doing newsletters, doing annual reports and the like. But when you think about doing an art publication, it's just such an opportunity to do something beautiful, something lasting, and something that would help the development of the artists' careers. So we decided in tandem with launching the collective to also launch the magazine. The magazine was set up in a very specific way. Our tagline for the magazine, and I think Peter is going to show you the cover of that as I talk, is art, innovation, and curation. This beautiful image on the cover is by a Chicago artist named James Nelson. The magazine itself was designed by an artist who's also an art director for Ebony Magazine. His name is Raymond Thomas, and Devorah Crable, who's on our team as Chief Marketing Officer, worked closely with me on the content for this magazine. So the way the magazine is set up in three distinct parts. So first we profile artists, then we profile collectors, then we profile curators, gallerists, or others that are associated with Black art. And during this first issue was a lot, it was a real labor of love, because we were able to support and show folks like Frank Frazier, who has been an artist for nearly 50 years. And we wanted to showcase him as our artist just because he has such a passion for mentoring and bringing along other artists. In the process, we also were able to show younger artists and the artists that were members of the collective. We were able to focus on their work. In my day-to-day work, working with clients on PR and media, what's very important for me is great photography. Because photographs tell stories, and we worked with some great photographers on this first issue. We did our first shoot with the collective in an old warehouse here in Chicago. So we got to be very, very creative in pulling this together. Even the size of the magazine was purposeful. We wanted something that could stand out. So if you had this in your home, it's an educational piece, but it's also a beautiful piece to have in your home to complement the art you have. So it's a little bit of an oversized magazine. When we were doing this, I told you we went to Art Basel in 2017, and I actually a couple from Paris who were doing a magazine called Art Premium. And I was just really struck by the color, the vibrancy of the magazine. So we met with them, we talked with them. They invited us to come over to Art Paris the following year. We made a trip to Paris, went to the show and talked with them and learned a little bit more about what they do. So we got some really great pointers from them. We worked with a company in Ohio, Freeport Press, to do this first edition. And to our great amazement, we entered the magazine the first year into a contest. There's a publishing contest called the Eddie and the Ozzy Awards, and the magazine was selected as a finalist for design during our first year out. So we were very, very excited about that. We are currently working on our second issue now and following that same pattern where we feature artists, we feature collectors, and we feature curators. Next week, when we have this session, our last session for the month, we're going to be talking with the artist Deborah Roberts, and Deborah Roberts' work is featured on the cover. So again, for me, it's very much about storytelling. It's very much about the visuals of art, because if you collect art, you know, it adds so much to your home and your life. That's what it has done for me. And that's what we wanted to do with this magazine, is to bring those elements in something that you could keep, something that you could learn from. We don't do really long form articles, but we do encourage people to read these articles, research on their own as well, because for me, this has been a process of education, meeting people like Halima, who I've learned so much, and I actually have her book myself. So for me, it's always a process of learning from people, learning more about Black art, and we hope that this magazine has been a contribution to that.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. It's really great learning more about Pigment and how it's structured and how it can be used as a tool and resource for all of us.
Absolutely.
So we are going to dive into this question session that we have going on, and I think that Patricia talking about her magazine is a great transition. So I'm going to ask all of you, what do you think that the role of traditional journals and publications are in the contemporary moment? And this is kind of a follow-up question, but how does that contrast to digital content that's being created right now? If anyone like to start? I think that Myrtis, you and I had talked about how you wanted to meet Patricia because there aren't very many African American journals out there in the US right now, well, internationally. If that's
Yes,
something you'd like to
that's
speak more
true.
about.
Yes, which is why I treasure her magazine, which I shared with you all earlier. Like I have the first, because as evident behind me, and if I were to turn my computer around, you would see that my office is full of books. Um, they are key to my understanding of African American art history, and also important in my role as a gallerist and also as a curator in my writings, in which I are in my role as contextualizing the work of the artists who are being featured either in exhibitions that are held here in my gallery, or when I serve as an independent curator and am organizing exhibitions that take place outside of my particular space. So the publications that we publish here, and I have several. I think the earliest one was done in, let's see, like 2009. It was for the exhibition our common bond, mother, daughter, sister, self, in which we were examining the shared experiences of Black women in their communities, in their various roles. And I solicited the support of Dr. Leslie King Hammond, who wrote the essay for the catalog. And that is something that's also very common with each publication that I publish here. I seek the assistance of a scholar to write the formative essay, and then I will write a curatorial statement. Because these publications serve as an educational tool as well as documentation of the exhibition, it's critically important to me that the work be understood within whatever context we're addressing here, be it social, political, cultural. Um, so, you know, this document will outlive us all, so to speak, and its role in the understanding of the intention of the artist, the importance of their work, why the exhibition was held, um, is evident in the publications that we produced. We, in addition to the exhibitions, there are a series of programs that take place. And that's done because of my commitment and belief in bringing the importance that we need to have intellectual discourse around the work, why it's important, why it's relevant, beyond just its aesthetic beauty, why the artist is compelled to create the work, what they're speaking to. And so the publications, once the exhibition has ended, provide that information. You know, the exhibits will come and go, but the publications will remain. And there are some that we do that are done in print, and that there are others that we produce online that are digital. They are free and downloadable. And um, Halima Taha supported a really poignant and important exhibition that we held here called Blackface, where we looked at the history of minstrelsy and then how the black face in our society today is how it's perceived. And so Halima wrote this essay that is just incredible and has continued to be talked about, analyzed by many. And it's just, again, the importance of it and having it online and dealing with such a poignant and potent subject allows for people across the world, because we live in a global society, to download that publication and to analyze what she has said within it, and then have the imagery there and the artist statement, because part of what's important in producing those catalogs is to draw from the artist statement so that we understand as we're examining and reading and learning what the artist's intention is, what compelled them, what they're talking about in terms of their state of mind and state of being Black. And there's no better voice that can bring understanding to that than the artist. So we take their words and also incorporate them into the publications so that there's no misunderstanding. There's no interpretation that isn't correct, so to speak. Because again, you know, I find that there is such a lack of scholarship, Black scholars, which is why I just admire what Kelly Morgan is doing. And I'm going to steal her thunder for a moment on Black art in America, because I read everything. I have to, you know, I sit down and I'm like,
Yes.
okay, it's Kelly time. It's Doc Kelly time. Because what Dr. Morgan lays out in those essays is just profound. And the fact that they're online means, again, that they are accessible to all. You know, our catalogs are on our website, And there are times when people can't afford to buy them. I think they're very affordable. But students sometimes they write and say, I'm writing an article or I'm studying this or that, and I'll just mail it to them. There are previews of the catalogs, but that's another reason why we make some of them just free. When again, there's a subject that is so important to who we are as Black people and how we are perceived. That's one of the reasons why Blackface was made free and downloadable. And another catalog that's on our website is that's free and downloadable is for our current exhibition. The title is Women Heal Through Rite and Ritual, in which we're examining and investigating traditional healing practices that have been passed down through generation. We all have the aunt that had the remedy for everything that ailed us, or our mother had those home remedies, and also about the tradition of voodoo, good voodoo. And then we have a little bit of play on it where, like with Renee Stout, she has an alter ego, Fatima, and she's the conjurer, she's a seer, and you go to her for your reading, and she will give you the potion for the lover that got away, and to bring that person back into your life. So there are many ways in which the writings play a role in providing a deeper understanding of who we are as a people, the nuances of our culture, and that's why I'm still very, very committed to making certain that our publications are an ongoing practice here and a serious part of our program.
That's beautiful. And thank you for that. It was great hearing about how closely connected all of us are. Dr. Kelly, would you like to talk more about your work with Black Art in America?
Sure.
Since
I
you
love
just gave you such a good build up.
it was perfect segue. Thank you, Myrtis. Because it was really, I agree wholeheartedly with you. Something about that I think is really interesting about my curatorial practice is that it's a contemporary practice, but I'm actually a historian. So sometimes I'll kind of joke and say I get pulled into contemporary art kicking and screaming. But much of what Myrtis is talking about, that nuance and the depths, right, and the diversity of our stories intraculturally was what was most important to me as a curator and as a scholar. And telling that story, through the works of the artists themselves, but then also going into museums, picking out the very, sometimes like the whitest white artists and telling those stories with that work, right? So coming up with, like Myrtis was saying, bringing our lens, to American art, period, or even European art in a lot of ways as well, right? Because I always say you don't have to look too hard, to find us in the work, and I've had, and I'm sure many people may know, I've had a very rocky, experience with that, right, in white institutions. And over the years, right, of fighting that fight, in three different institutions, Najee Dorsey and Sateria Dorsey, and I've, made acquaintances because they were like, as a curator of historic art, you are doing something that we have not seen somebody do, since like the 60s, and we really, want to, cultivate a relationship. So I've known Najee and Sateria for almost, close to a decade now. And when, he approached and said, I would love for you to, to provide more of this content to a broader audience, through Baya, I just jumped at the chance because it is the one place, that I have been able to write those stories, and get that history out, so talking about, Jacob Lawrence and Williams H. Johnson in conversation, with Jean Toomer and Ida B. Wells. Museums don't always have the space, right, in an interpretive label, to do that, particularly when you're doing rotations, right, and you're not doing exhibitions. And then sometimes they don't always want to know, you know, like that's the other thing I think that we don't talk about enough, you know, in the field, is just how much we know that they don't, you know, you know, and when we bring that expertise in the door, it's not actually what they're hiring us for all the time. And so we have to have we have to have our own spaces, and we always have, right? It's not like, you know, we have to kind of start from zero or start from scratch, you know, but it was, you know, finding a place, you know, where I could put that work, you know, where it would be appreciated, and it would be valued, you know, so which also, you know, I think opened my eyes, right, to my own programming, you know, of how we are pushed, you know, in graduate school, it was after grad school for me, or like in fellowships, right, to go into these institutions that may value the work in a particular way, right? So you may value Black contemporary art, you know, or, you know, even some of the legacy artists in terms of the canon, but they don't value Black culture. And as a Black culture historian, that was the part, you know, that was most egregious, you know, and most important, you know, to me.
Phyllis,
So
can I see
working
that
with
phone?
Naji, you know, even currently, you know, working with Christopher West and Tom Pegg at Black Art Auction, you know, which is how Kayla and I met, you know, it was such a breath of fresh air for me, you know, because there was this moment where I said, what are you gonna do? You know, if you go back, you know, you can go back to academia, you know, but you really want to curate, what are you gonna do? Because these are spaces, you know, that do not actually want this history, right? That do not actually want these stories. And so it's like, you know, we'll create your own space, which I was like, okay, well, you know, that's doable. But that's not necessarily, you know, that's not a venture that I necessarily want to start, you know, at 40. Not that that's like super old, but it was just like, you know, I need to reinvest, you know, in the spaces, you know, that I represent, and in the spaces that will actually value the work. You know, and so I was super, super thankful, you know, for my relationship with Naji and Sateria.
Yeah. And then we can hop back to Patricia, right? So you are publishing your own Black art magazine. What was your inspiration for this, and what gives you the momentum to keep going?
Certainly. Well, I wanted to make sure you hadn't talked with Halima yet. Did you want to kind of bring her into
Halima
the
likes to go
conversation?
last. She like,
Okay.
do you
All
want?
right.
She likes to
Oh,
close the
All right.
show.
no, I like
Well, no
whatever
problem.
question you want
So,
answered.
Oh, well, if you're more than welcome to. So, I mean, you wrote a quintessential text that had redefined the entire Black art world. What was what void did you see in the marketplace that led you to write the text in the first place? And how do you feel it has impacted the way that we all work now?
Well, the catalyst for collecting African American art, works on paper and canvas, came from being a former art gallery owner. I had a gallery in Gramercy Park, and it was the first gallery to promote abstract artists of African descent, and we marketed the work as the visual equivalent of the jazz idiom. And that was in the 1980s, and at that time, most of our clients were major collectors of German Expressionism and the Japanese, who in the 1980s were buying everything in the art market. It was also a time where a lot of the historic art from the 19th century and earlier parts of the 20th century were being purchased. And there was a collector who used to come to the gallery frequently, and she had never purchased anything from me, but you know, I feel very strongly about inviting people to discover new and exciting things about themselves through art, and trying to be as helpful as possible. And so we used to have many conversations, and then one day she came in very excited and she said, I just purchased this Elizabeth Catlett print and I'm so excited, and it was just such a steal. I got to show it to you. And she opens up this print, and it was a lovely print, but the person who sold it to her in 1980, I'd say it was 1985, sold it to her for about $7,500. And today, that same print does not sell for more than $4,700. So I was just horrified that about the lack of integrity on the part of the dealer and taking advantage of this particular collector's passion and interest in collecting in general, but in particular collecting works by African American artists. So I decided that I felt very strongly about it in terms of my own moral and ethical compass. And I decided that I would write a book that was a how-to and a reference guide to provide any collector of African American art a framework so I could nurture informed collectors. And the other intention was to support and expose artists. And also, having been an art dealer and having a gallery, there's an inordinate amount of time that you spend with clients trying to educate them and guide them and discover what they like and what their sensibilities are. So this book, such a book didn't exist for African American art, and there were chapters on the history of painting, prints, and photography. And I was very deliberate in putting a section on photography because that medium would be the last medium that people would really seriously consider collecting by African American, as fine art by African American artists. And then there were there were chapters on collecting matting, framing, tax considerations, insurance, appraising. And there were 190 images, full color images, along with a nationwide directory of art dealers who specialized or included American artists of African descent. And ironically, the book was meant as my gift to the art world because I was at a point in my life where I was moving into other areas of interest. And it ended up bringing me further back into the art world that I was in the process of leaving. But I felt that it was an essential publication. And I would like to point out that at that time, there were thousands of catalogs that, unless you were involved in the art communities, you would never have access to or know that they existed. But there were thousands of catalogs from the Harlem Renaissance, up to the 1980s that were all over the country. But, they were limited edition catalogs and somewhat obscure. And the primary text that existed included James Porter's book, Modern Negro Art, and Dr. Samella Lewis's Art African American. And in essentially collecting African American art was born out of necessity. And I came out of that tradition, starting with James Porter, who established the field of African American art history. Because when he was a young artist, he wanted to know, why didn't these artists from the Harlem Renaissance receive any critical acclaim? And he was told that they didn't because Negro artists haven't been in this country long enough to be producing art to write about. So that was the catalyst for him to write his 1943 New York University master's thesis, which resulted in becoming the book Modern Negro Art, which was the first African American art history book, and it established the field. And then his student, David Driscoll, continued in this tradition of necessity, and he curated 2 centuries of Black American art that was traveling all over the country and even out of the country. And there was a exhibition catalog showing works from the 19th century to the present. So he was saying, yes, we have a history, but not only do we have a history, we've been here for 200 years. And Dr. Samella Lewis's book, Art African American, came out a couple of years later in the 70s. And she was the first African American woman art historian with a PhD. And she was the cornerstone for the field of African American art history. And then subsequent to her is, Dr. Richard Powell at Duke, and he wrote a very pivotal publication, also out of necessity, that was an interdisciplinary publication about Black visual culture. And then in the same year, that was in the 90s, late 90s, Sharon Patton wrote an African American art history book that was written within the context of American art history and within the specific canon of American art. And so my publication came right after that, and those were the primary publications in the 20th century, coming into the end of the 20th century. What's been wonderful is that in the last 21 years, the scholarship, I remember in the 80s, there was concern, where are we going to get more, Black scholars in African American art history? And then it was wonderful that so many people who went in different directions in academia, they were integrating Black visual history and culture into their own personal areas of study and interest. And so now, 21 years later, we have hundreds of books on different aspects or periods of African American art history or specific artists and monographs. And that's been really wonderful to see. It's also been really interesting to see the interest now in Black visual culture in the marketplace, because at the time in the 1980s, when I had the gallery in Gramercy Park, people were collecting, but a lot of the artists that we had, a lot of the 57th Street galleries and the Soho galleries at the time, there was no Chelsea developed as it is now. But they were not showing many Black artists. In fact, many of the artists would go to find out about how they could show their work, and as soon as they walked in, they were just told, well, we don't show Black art. So they never even looked at the portfolios for many of those artists. And some of those artists included, Terry Atkins, Ed Clark, Joe Overstreet, even Mary Lovelace O'Neill, and just a host of different artists that people are clamoring to get their hands on right now. And so, I will say that institutions like Kinkelaba House in the East Village were very instrumental in curating very important exhibitions of Black visual culture and every medium, style, and movement. And they were doing a lot of exhibitions that were a lot more cutting edge than even the Studio Museum at the time. And they continue to do that. And they also allow artists who are represented by certain galleries that will not allow them to make anything else, or they will not exhibit any other work than what they've been successfully selling. And so Kinkelaba would provide the venue for them to show their experimental work. But I also want to say that the significance of collecting African American art in the fact that it got published in and of itself is pretty extraordinary, because all of the major art publishers, all of them, when you go to a bookstore, every single one you see, all of them said to me when I was trying to get a publisher, that Black people don't read, they don't buy art, and white people don't buy art by Black people. And they also felt that the only way that such a book could have success for them was if it was in conjunction with a curated exhibition at an institution. And for many years, some of the books, like Harlem Renaissance, that came out of the Studio Museum in Harlem, Abrams would slap their or any of the publishers would slap their name on the spine of the book and handle the distribution. But the costs to produce that publication all had to come out of Black institutions. They were not willing to really invest in these publications or Black visual culture. And of course, that isn't the case now. But this history is a significant history that continues to reflect the poor perception of value of Black people, and especially the poor perception of value of Black artists and their work, which of course comes out of a history of the justification of why you had to enslave Black people. You know, they were considered subhuman, unintelligent, good for breeding, and good for labor. How could they produce fine art? Because fine art is fundamentally about visual ideas and concepts. So those attitudes and those values were carried through up until recently, and in some parts of the country and in these institutions, certainly they continue to exist. But the point that I'm making is that this is a significant reason why a lot of meritorious work by American artists of African descent have not received the kind of critical acclaim or exposure. And it's important to take note that the artists that the art world is looking at now are, a lot of them are either 2 minutes from being 6 feet under in the ground, or they are, much older. They're in their 70s and their 80s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they also prefer the historic artists who are now deceased. So, and you're seeing all of these, this direction into portraiture, and great comfort in selling the imagery of Black bodies. But these auction houses also sold real Black bodies. So now they're selling the ideas and pictures of Black bodies. And I think many of them think that many people are not cognizant of really what's going on in terms of how the culture continues to be commodified and misappropriated, reappropriated. At some of the art fairs. In fact, Patricia, that year in 2017, that was the year we met in Miami at Art Basel.
Yeah.
And that particular year, I went to all of the fairs that were there, and it was astounding how many people had integrated, of all ethnic backgrounds, Jean-Michel Basquiat iconography in their art, because that was the year that I think that was the extraordinary auction record that took place. And you had a lot of white artists whose work was very different prior to 2017 and 2018, who were suddenly interested in doing portraits of Black women, or photographing Black women, or doing Black portraiture, or integrating brown and Black skinned people in their work because it's so hot in the market. But what's most important is what Kelly was talking about in terms of our cultural value, and as well as Myrtis just talking about the value, both of you, the existence, coming from a long history, and that the ideas aren't going to dry up, and neither is the creativity. And I think that what's really wonderful is that there's more visibility in terms of beginning to recognize that the intellectual and creative prowess of people of African descent all over the world is really, actually, it's revealing how much of their cultural legacy and trust has been stolen by all of these other countries and cultures because of the potency of the messaging and the virility of the passion behind the work and the quality of it. So I guess I'd say that, I'm happy that my book has contributed to the momentum, because it reminds me of Elizabeth Catlin and Samella Lewis, who were both mentors of mine and friends. And they both said, none of this work is about us as individuals. the work that all of us do, it's not about us. It's not me, I. It's important for us to keep the wheel moving. We're cogs in this moving wheel, and we're contributing, and we're adding to it. And I think that the only thing that saddens me greatly, and Kelly and I have discussed this many times, is that, is the nature of social media and the nature of the kind of writing that is and isn't done, which tends to be very surface and mostly of a generation that do not know what a Dewey Decimal System is, or what going through a card catalog is, or
Wow.
meandering in the stacks in a library where you happen upon an idea or a book that you never thought you would read. Everything is limited to what they're exposed to, and they would just Google it. Or critical thinking has been lost in the educational system in the last 30 years. So to ask the right questions, even in a Google search, isn't happening. So there are a lot of very superficial articles and factually incorrect articles that are being written. And the other writers in general who are trying to catch up to understand, they want a quick tutorial in years. I mean, if on this panel we have probably about 250, if not 300 years of experience here, and they want a quick tutorial.
Yeah,
you know
that's
so
amazing.
it's
Yeah.
Can I jump in
so
really
it's
quick too,
please,
Kayla, to piggyback off
Kelly
of
is
that?
like,
I mean, that is so true, Halima. Like, as a PhD, in African American studies, my expertise in African American history or African American art history was all self study. It was a class I took in 2009 in my master's program, African American art, that was like the only one of its kind at the time. And I was kind of new, to my interest in art history in general. So I didn't realize at that time that it was one of the only courses, that existed like this side of the Mississippi River, outside of like Fisk, Clark, Spelman, Howard, right? And it was literally me like reading Lisa Farrington's footnotes and creating our own image as closely as I read the text. And then getting into graduate school and then reaching out to Rick Powell, calling Deb Willis saying, hey, I know you don't know me from a can of paint, but I really need a copy of, the Black female body, and having, the art historians in the field say, who is this? Has this graduate student, Kelly Morgan from Massachusetts, emailed you? Because I was bugging the hell out of everybody. Finding my way back to Porter and in beyond Porter, finding Freeman Murray's, book in like 1907, or 1905 on, which was like the original Black and Western art, text. Finding Benjamin Brawley's work, from the 1880s, reading Du Bois's art criticism, reading Alain Locke's art criticism, and all of his work, where there was like, outside of this really this really great community of people who like Halima and like, and people who were in Myrtis and Galleries, who were doing the work, through, I would say from, in the late 40s, up through the 80s, it didn't exist. Like it wasn't, you couldn't go online and find that stuff. I wouldn't have even known, who Rick Powell was had I not read a footnote, not actually saw something on like a Tumblr page, right? And for me, I love that, Halima kind of broke down the historiography there, which is why I did the historiography video, that's on Via right now, because most people don't know that, don't even know those texts, and they're online, and it's like, this Black contemporary art blog, right? Or this Black contemporary art, Instagram page, or Twitter feed, and it misses so much, of
Kelly,
what.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to before I forgot what you're saying right now, because we can't also forget, Dr. Leslie King Hammond and Dr. Lowry Sims. Lowry
Right.
Sims was the first Black curator at the Metropolitan Museum for like 28 years. And she and Leslie King Hammond for years were curating all over the United States important exhibitions. And I mean, they were like the dynamic duo, and their curatorial work inspired people like Kelly Jones. I mean, it's and all of the generation after too. It's because they were scholars and then they were also curators, and they also came out of that sort of linear historic, like a linear aesthetic pedigree within within the field. And also, when you were talking a little bit about Alain Locke and and Du Bois and everything, even the concept of a Black aesthetic was not something that visual artists, Black artists, were really contemplating in the same way. That whole conversation early on was more of a literary aesthetic that Du Bois entertained. And what's really interesting is that he didn't chime in on writing about the artists of the Harlem Renaissance, because he had his own aesthetic in terms of his talented 10th idea of what that looked like, and he could not support the imagery of Archibald Motley or Palmer Hayden, because it was perpetuating an aesthetic that he particularly was not interested in representing his talented 10th concept. So that was a very interesting thing. But they talked about Black aesthetic briefly, and then again it came up again at the Metropolitan Museum with Norma Marie Bearden and William T. Williams and a host of other artists. But there was only one time in history that the artist had an opportunity to make a statement about Black artists and a Black aesthetic, and that was with the Chicago's Wall of Respect, the famous Wall of Respect. And but they didn't. They did the mural, but they didn't include any visual artists in it. They didn't include an image of Henry Osawa Tanner. They didn't include Elizabeth Catlett or any of the women artists. And that was an opportunity that they had to say, our value as artists in Black visual culture, in Black culture at large. They were valuable because they were making the murals, but they never picked up the baton to really begin to talk about it. And the only time there was a concept of really of a Black aesthetic was Africover, because they made that political statement, no white pigment. And I bring up Africover because Myrtis is, did a major, you got to talk about it, Myrtis, a major thing, bringing a specific work to auction and getting it the acclaim and the attention that it needed. And I think, Myrtis, you should talk about that, because this is the stuff that the dealers are also doing behind the scenes. It's not just showing exhibitions and catalogs and working with clients, but how they're getting the work at auction, which is significant. If you're appraising work, you need to have consistent values, and we've only had consistent values since 2008. So Myrtis, share a little bit about.
Speak to that briefly, but I wanted to allow Patricia. Did you want to make comments first? I can go back to that point, Halima.
Oh, certain. No, the things I wanted to shed some light on too was, just as Halima spoke, Samella Lewis and what she did with her Black Art Quarterly, which then became the international African American art book. Those were the kind of inspirations that I had. We actually were able to work with Samella's son. So in the new issue of the magazine, we're going to have an interview with her. We sent her a list of Q&A, and one of the questions we ask is, out of all the roles that you played as a historian, as a curator, as an artist, as a publisher, what was the most important? And she did say being an artist was. But again, to be able to share those kind of tidbits, you talked about Alain Locke, and in the first magazine we went back and we talked about Alain Locke's experiences and how he went to Africa and how he was such a proponent of African art and the representation and how you brought that into Howard University. So again, these are things, again, because I have an interest and I want to know more and I'm learning a lot on this call. Those are the things that we're trying to put forth in this magazine. We have a piece in the upcoming magazine about John Lewis and how John Lewis was informed by his art professor, and for his whole life he collected African American art and how it inspired the movement. So I just get really energized, and I think each one of you should be in a subsequent issue that we have. I mean, there are so many great stories here, so I did want to interject that.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great.
So regarding the sale at auction, it was a work by Afri-Cobra artist Nelson Stevens. It was a seminal piece because it was featured in their first exhibition at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And what that sale did for Nelson personally and for the Afri-Cobra group as a whole was one, it helped to increase the value of his work. And two, the ripple effect in that it also helped to bring attention to who he was as an artist and also the group as a whole. I held in my gallery an exhibition to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Africoba, in which we produced a catalog for that, which is what I was holding up. You know, it's an important group. They were at the forefront of the Black arts movement. It was formed on the group was formed on the south side of Chicago, and you know, when we look at the legacy and the continuum of Black art history, we really have Afri-Cobra and other artist collectives that came along during that time to thank for that. I also consigned at auction a piece that sold recently in the April auction at Swan. It was a work by David Hammonds, and it was a piece that he gifted a classmate of his when they were in college. The piece sold for over $100,000. So the beauty
Wow.
of that sale for me is as it was for Nelson, in that the owner of the Hammonds piece was African American, and of course Nelson is as well. So we talk about Black economic empowerment. Those funds go directly to them, which is key, because there are many times when works are coming to auction and you know they are white owned, and so of course whoever consigns it receives the financial benefit of that. But in those two examples, and I consign at auction and buy at auction for clients on an ongoing basis, that's part of the service that I offer. I do my research, my due diligence. It isn't that I just turn the work over to the auction houses and allow them to dictate what those values are. I also come with my market valuation numbers, and there's often a conversation about where we meet with that, which is again, you know, something that my clients greatly appreciate, because the assessment is something that I do on a regular basis. It's very foreign to my clients, the most highly intelligent amongst them, only because it's not their area of expertise. And so they are a bit intimidated stepping into that role. So, you know, I've been working with not only Swans, but other auction houses for in excess of 10 years, maybe 10 to 15 years. And it's part of the quiet work that I do behind the scenes. You know, I realize the value of that service. I understand the impact that it's having on the Black art market. As Halima said, having those numbers, and that being the auction results, transparent, so that, you know, everyone's aware of where those numbers are going in terms of the value, the increased value, as which is also why we see the consumption of Black art and culture reaching all-time highs. For the most part, I think that if we look at the contemporaries of many of those artists whose works are going to auction, that Black artists' works as a whole are still undervalued. I love and take great pride in seeing works by, for example, Sam Gilliam, Charles White, Romero Bearden, reaching record highs. I think that, Basquiat is still um, one of the highest results in terms of auction results. And again, being numbers that are transparent, there are a lot of private sales that are going on that, we don't have privy to that information in general. But Basquiat is still the artist whose works is selling in excess of millions. And then, of course, we're celebrating Kerry James Marshall's sale at auction, which the piece was acquired by P. Diddy. So, but I want to digress for a moment, and thank you, Halima, for allowing me to talk about bringing that subject up. But I want to digress for a moment because I want to go back to scholarship and Dr. Morgan here, and I want to talk to her and share with her where I need some help. So, because Halima did a great job of taking us through the history of Black scholars who have written about artists from our past. Where there is a tremendous void now is the contemporary artists and what they're doing. So I'm begging you, I'm pleading with you, Doc Morgan, because I read and reread what you're writing, the gospel truth. But the contemporary artists are in such need now of your scholarship for generations. So your books will be looked at as porters. Your writings will be assessed like those of Locke's and others, and Samella Lewis. All of the books that were named here, I'm proud to say I have them on my shelves. They have dog ears, they have highlighting in them, and I want some Doc Morgan books on my shelf now. I showed off my Halima, and I'm so excited and thrilled about the new book that she's working on, because no one has matched what Halima has done. No one has matched what she's done. And now she's taking us to the diaspora, the African diasporic view perspective on contemporary art. I mean, who can take that task on but this wonderful woman who is so learned and brilliant in her writings, because I can attest to that because she's written essays for me. So the work has to be ongoing, and what Patricia is doing through her publication is another great mammoth Herculean feat of continuing the cause and the mission of bringing us information of the day. Your people who read this magazine, again, like you said, Dr. Morgan, going through those footnotes so it leads you back to the history of all of these writings that are so important and so critical. I mean, I love Farrington's work. I mean, Lisa's just, again, another brilliant writer, just lyrical in the way that she writes. That's the way I feel about Samella Lewis too, who I look to. And I'm very fortunate that Dr. Leslie King Hammond is my mentor, and I was just invited to join a curatorial team with she and Laurie Sims. I had to read the email 3 times before I responded, because I thought, what, me? Wait a minute. Maybe they just want me to run an errand or something.
Wow.
So, it's like it's women's work, right? We are the keepers of the culture. And I know the brothers are holding it down too, but I have to say that I just take such great pride when I see the work, the serious work that we are about, and understanding the importance of our legacies and contributing to the preservation of Black art, history, and culture. And it happens online, and I agree there's it. I wish a lot of what I stumble upon because some things, one thing leads you to the next. This is the web, but it's not reviewed. It's not well researched or researched at all. It's a thought that becomes an emotion and a feeling and an opinion, but it's not rooted in fact. And then that gets carried forth. And that's why so much. And then how do you reverse that? Because the individuals that lock onto that are probably not those that are going to pick up Halima's book. They're probably not going to read Patricia's magazine. And that's where the truth lies. So that's why this ongoing effort and mission to bring truth to power, to bring truth to who we are, is just, it has to be done. It has to be done. So, Doc Morgan, I'm looking
Wonderful.
forward to your next exploitation, or not exploitation, but expo. Now I'm getting talking too much here. Your next writing, I'll just put it simply, on Black art in America. I get my tea and I sit back and I just rest in it, because I work in isolation a lot. I'm here at the gallery. We're very busy, and so you're the scholar for me. You're my scholarship that comes, and it creates conversation and dialogue amongst my peers, my colleagues. We're talking, did you read Kelly's piece today? Oh, girl, wait, I had to go get a dictionary to look up that word. So you
And I
are
will
being
say, I love it
celebrated.
when I have to do that.
Oh my God,
I
you're
love
being
it when you have
celebrated
to
and you
do
don't
that
even
because it
know it.
makes
You are
you
being
study.
revered amongst my colleagues and you don't even know it. And we're waiting with bated breath for Halima, because the reason I have that book is because Halima's book is because there are very few appraisers that were practicing when her book came out. I happen to be friends of many of them. We have a really good relationship, and we collaborate on a lot of things. And everyone was abuzz when Halima's book hit the shelves. And it was like, oh my God, you have to get this book. I mean, it became our Bible, because for me, it exposed me to a lot of artists I didn't know anything about. And then again, it led me to research and writing about, and just out of curiosity, trying to put all of the puzzle pieces together in terms of who they are, those being the artists, who their contemporaries are, and understanding the importance of their work. So, I'm a bookworm at heart, and I live to read, and the word is so important to me. So thank you all for contributing to all of that.
Thank you so much, Myrtis. You're so right.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Mercedes.
Halima's
Well, I
book,
have to tell you,
like,
Mercedes,
helped me learn
I,
the canon. Like, I would not, have known nearly as much, particularly through, just doing self study, without like Halima's book and Lisa's book. Were like my two Bibles. And you're not the only one, that's on me, about writing.
Okay.
Yeah, I get that all the time. And like Najee's on me about it a lot, because he's like, you like your little history cave because you're comfortable in your history cave. You're comfortable in this. But I was so thankful, like my Samuel Levi Jones essay, which was like so important to me. And I think, and Sam too, but the institution had made the decision that it had made to kind of step away from publication. So it was, Sam was working, myself and my co-curator was working, all of Sam's galleries, like we did everything we could to try to get that catalog out, and it just didn't pan out. And so we were just devastated. So I was so thankful that Najee was like, I'll publish it. Because I think you're right. It's like that kind of putting the contemporary artists in not just historical context, which is kind of like my specialization.
Yes.
But any of just that kind of, right, like Delita Martin, is somebody that I really want to write about.
Yes.
Because I love her work, or Lavette Ballard, is but Lavette is kind of like, I know her from Philly. So it's just been wonderful, kind of watching her career, take off in the way that it has. And I've been very ginger, about it, but I do, because I've always, and I'll just be honest, contemporary art was a space that I didn't feel was like I was strong enough in it, like I didn't know enough. And so I always kind of shied away from it a little bit. And so some of it is just like getting over my own kind of personal insecurities too, in stepping into it and creating something. Because like I said, a lot of artists, a lot of other gallerists I know, are like, you gotta write about this stuff. And it's true, because in 15, 20 years from now, you can't, or I would say I wouldn't want my students looking back, needing scholarship that isn't there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I attended the curatorial program at MICA, and George Sissel was my professor. I was the oldest student, and wow, it was really a really interesting experience. The program was designed that, it was divided up in, so it was a practicum. So you just get in there and you're just doing the work, you're doing the research, and at the end, you are divided up into teams, the historical curatorial team and the contemporary curatorial team, and I was on the historic team. And what was really fascinating about that experience for me, because see, I'm old, and so I'm not as guarded in my speech. And so we had several, and we were, the exhibition's focus was the slavery, the history of slavery in Maryland. And there were several students going through the program at the time that were here from foreign countries. So the experience of slavery in America is very foreign to them. And there was a level of insensitivity that made it very difficult for me. There was like maybe four other Black students, yeah, and two of them were borrowed from Morgan State University, and that's an interesting kind of dynamic. Oh, and I take that back. There was um, three, so there were five of us, and then the majority were young white kids, and just some of the subjects that could really get they were very sensitive in nature, very painful for the African Americans in the group. The response by many of the students was laughter, and it was just a bizarre situation, really bizarre situation. So it, but but what it did for me is cement, one, the need for me to continue the work, um, the importance of research and writing, because for me, I was struggling to find information that I needed to contextualize the experience. And I'm going to end after this because something just popped into my mind. We went to a historic site here in Maryland that was a plantation. It's now run by the Park Service. And there were diagrams, large ones, talking about how that plantation was used, like what they grew, how we walked on the grounds. There were like areas where the slaves had lived. On the diagram, there was a description that referred
Oops, sorry guys, I got lost.
Hi.
Hey there.
Yeah, everybody froze.
Oh no. Okay, it wasn't just me. That feels a little better.
No.
Okay,
Here
3 of
we are.
5, 4.
We're back.
Kelly,
Good.
look at you.
We were getting excited about that story, Myrtis. I know we don't have a
I
lot of
know.
time, but I wanted to
No.
hear this. Please finish that story about the plantation.
Well, they refused to use the word slave. And on the diagram, it described them as workers. So I challenged the park ranger and asked why that was so. And she became very nervous. It was a young Asian girl, and everyone else working there is white. And she whispered to me off to the side. She goes, "They won't allow us to use that word. We can't use the word slave. That's why it doesn't appear there." And I was just furious. So what I was saying is that this is why it's so important for us to write our own stories and
Absolutely.
not allow people to manipulate the truth so that they're comfortable. And that is precisely what was happening there.
Yes. Yes.
And I raised the
Kayla,
stink
now
about it. That's
usually
why I said I was the oldest one, so I didn't care. I already had my business. I'm working for myself. Y'all need to
oh
change
boy.
this. The students were like, "Oh no, don't say anything." I'm like, "Oh no, I'm gonna protest
I'm gonna say something.
this."
Absolutely.
I'm the nonconformist hellraiser child.
And I
Wonderful.
think
We are
that's
I'm from Chicago. I'm no punk, right?
right,
right.
There you
exactly.
That's what I
go.
always say. I'm like,
Right.
I'm a
But
Detroiter, you know, and
it's so important though.
yeah,
It's so
you know,
important
I'm
for
not
us to
scared of
say
a fight.
something.
Yes,
No,
absolutely.
and that's the thing, we have to say something and stand up. That post-colonial conditioned response of you know being everything that is contrary to celebrating or valuing you as a human being and your culture. We have to say something and not be afraid or um, be happy or satisfied just to be sitting at a table. What are you doing while you're there? And and Kelly, you know all about that, you know, because you witnessed a lot and you had a chance to see, how people were happy to be there, and but they weren't making their voices right. They weren't making their voices heard or telling the truth or saying, no, we have to use the right language. We have to contextualize it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
you know,
Indiana
And I think
is
even
notorious.
using like their, I think I've gotten so, this is one of those things that I like pat myself on the back for. I've gotten so good at using their own work and their own narratives against them, and to, flush that same issue, out. It's like the way that you all have like created these whole institutions to lie to yourselves, you know, and how problematic that is, which is why I'm so uncomfortable to you, as an institution, or, even uncomfortable to certain individuals. And I think as women, right, like we've been saying, or you have been saying tonight, this is women's work. And I think as Black women in particular, it's like, what else do we have to lose? Because I think we exist, community wise, we're somewhat singular and isolated sometimes, outside of one another, and, and I just believe in that, that Zora Neale Hurston quote, of, if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. I'm also not a proponent of calling a duck an exotic chicken. I just got so tired of the exotic chicken narrative. And I it's like, because it feels very Twilight Zone-ish to me, and Myrtis, I'm sure it was just like, having that same kind of feeling,
Oh
right,
my
on that
God,
tour, where it's
yes.
like, really, you know, you know, and I'm, just kind of like the kids say, it's like, where they do that at? Like, no, that's not at all how that happened. And to expect me to, stand here as a person of color, particularly as an African American person, and just act like that's okay. Like, I'm not gonna do that, And I said, and I didn't, like right now, it's like I'm the most reactionary curator in the field, And I said, I will be irrational and reactionary, and as much as y'all want me to, but that doesn't make any of this stuff, any less true.
Any less true, you know.
And it not only doesn't make it any less true, what comes to mind though is that to be in this century and for you to be able to take the stance that you've taken, um, and still be able to work and function and be respected and revered is actually not the same reality that would have happened for someone like Lowry Sims from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because she was the only person, and she was opening the doors for the generations after her. And so it really makes me pause when you think about the people who were the generations before our generation who had to withstand a lot of stuff. They knew the same truth, but it was more important for them to push and forge ahead and then take advantage of the opportunities to do the scholarship or the exhibitions. But they were at the table, but they were saying things and they were working, but in a different way. Whereas I feel that now people are at those tables and it's all about self-aggrandizement. It's not with the same sense of purpose or value towards or respect or regard for the culture. So I just
Well,
wanted to say that because it's important to see how the history of all of that comes, and the empowerment from curators like Lowry in that sense, who, do you follow what I mean?
No,
Yes,
absolutely. Because I say
absolutely.
all the time, like I wouldn't be able to, right, be as vocal, as I
Yeah,
am without the work, her work, Trentobia Hayes, Benjamin, Gilbert Coker,
yeah, Tobia.
I mean, Burl Wright, like just all of those women, like you said, Halima, who had to get us in the space,
Right.
and had to get the stories and the history just on the radar, you know, um, at that time, and I think it was, for me, what, like you said, it was important for me is taking it further. Right now, is saying, okay,
Mhm.
so now those women did that, and like you said, you think about the things that they took, the things that they swallowed, in the battles that they fought and won, right, and like and even the effects of that. Now I'm like, that is what, 35 years? We're 35 years, from that point. You owe, not only do you owe me more than that, sitting in this room right now with you, you owe all of them more than that. And if
Right.
I gotta flip this table
Exactly.
over to get that for them, that's what's getting ready to happen. Right?
yeah.
Well, you
Yep.
should have flipped that table. You should have flipped. You did.
Yeah.
Like,
I was like, that's what's getting
Well,
ready to happen. So I was like, I'm out on this limb. I mean, and I don't, I don't know, Shadra, the young lady who was working on the Basquiat shot at Guggenheim. I don't know her personally. Um,
Mm.
but like that same kind of thing where it's just like, no, like now, like you said, us just being here, me just doing a show. And I mean, in that situation where they completely tried to just erase her whole existence,
right.
which was psychotic in my opinion. But it's like, no, you're gonna give me what I deserve, not what you just
Mhm.
assume that you just gonna, not that you just, assume or want to hand me because you've quote unquote given me a job. No, I've earned this job, right? Because I didn't call the Indianapolis Museum of Art. You called me. Or I didn't call the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, right? I'm like, that those days, I think are just done, in terms of like how I feel about it, and how,
Yeah.
not all of my colleagues, but several of my Black female curatorial colleagues, are feeling now too, where we're
Yeah.
just tired. It's like we played nice, right? We've done the PC thing, we tried to like bring them along, you know,
It's
and then at some
amazing.
point it was like just having to admit to ourselves that like some people just don't want to come,
Well,
Mhm.
you know.
Kelly, to that point, I'm loving what I see now since this racial reckoning is hit. The Guggenheim is getting called the Museum of Contemporary Art, the NOLA Museum. All these employees are stepping up and they're speaking their truth. They're sending letters and they're telling these stories and what they've gone through all these years. And it's hit every piece of our culture. And for it to hit the art world, I think it's probably long overdue. And saluting the work that you've done and the things that you've gone through. So it's a pretty interesting time to be a part of this, to be telling these stories now. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you for
You all put in
all your
amazing work. Yeah. I know here on the emerging professional side, none of us would have the space to be here without the work that all of you guys have put in. So thank you, really. We did have one question come in from the audience. So some believe that until we establish and control our own auction houses, there will always be disparity in the monetary value compared to white artists. Do you agree with this? And I think Halima, you might be the best one to start to reckon with that question.
Um, I think that that is true in terms of the artists across the board. I think it's important for, and I say that because currently a lot of the Black artists that are being identified and selected and brought to auction and are getting, astronomical figures, many of them are extraordinary and they deserve it. They claim because they're not necessarily getting the benefit of the auctions. But there are so many artists that are not being selected by galleries and auction houses because they're unaware of them or their history. And so I think that there is truth, and it goes back to publications, magazines and books and the scholarship and and having more Black writers writing about Black visual culture within the context of world art history and also within the context of African diasporic visual history and cultural history. And I think it also speaks to how the collective activity functions. It's not just the galleries, but it's the integrated relationship between the artists and the dealers and the curators and the auction houses and the critics and the collectors and the appraisers and the historians and academia. That whole collective activity work together to propel an artist into the marketplace. But I think if we have more scholarship and we're um, writing more about contemporary artists that are lesser known or artists that are not just graduates from Yale. You have to be a Yalian, to make it to auction or at certain fairs, it's ridiculous. Or you have to have had the stamp of approval from the Studio Museum in Harlem. It excludes so many and so much meritorious work. And there's value in all of that, but I agree. We have to continue to roll up our sleeves and do the work, and also educate ourselves, share and educate others. And there's that horrible saying, if you want to hide something from someone, put it in a book. And people have to start reading books, not just sound bites, on their Instagram feed and all of the stuff that's happening. And also, established institutions need to do their due diligence when they are working with professionals who, are interested in Black visual culture, but claim they have expertise and they're just Googling and they're not reading the books. There's a foundation for all of this. It's like the concept that Black dealers, never existed. When I wrote my book, there were 49 Black owned galleries in America. Okay. And, and they existed before, and it's like, oh, the white galleries have discovered Black artists. Where are the Black dealers? That horrible article 3 years ago, and just these false narratives that exist. So I agree that we do have to keep working. We are working, we have been working, but we have to expand the tentacles and really actually work together in a very different way than ever before.
Definitely. So we are over time, because how can we cut off such a good conversation, right? But I do have one final question, and I'm going to split it kind of half and half. So, and do you guys have, and this is mostly for Myrtis and Patricia, I think, do you guys have suggestions for artists who are looking to have their work recorded on how to go about doing so? How do you get um, someone interested in reviewing your work, especially if you aren't affiliated with some place like Yale or a major institution?
Myrtis, I'm going
Well,
to defer to you on that one. Yes.
okay. Well, I think with Pigment is a prime example of a publication that is not perhaps so interested in the pedigree of the artist, but just the quality of the artist's work. And, you know, she's part of this art ecosystem of documenting and recording the artists and their career. So, you know, and so that's one component. The other's component is, you know, with the internet and having a website, artists can post a lot of information on their website. That's one way in which who they are is available for public view. You know, if you know, documenting your work is important. They have to be responsible for doing that themselves. When artists are not represented by a gallery, or when they are being shown in a gallery, one of the uh, priorities that they should be asking about is the gallery going to produce a catalog? What type of documentation of that experience is the gallery providing? And I think that, you know, just asking that, it may not be a physical catalog, it could be again an online publication, but there should be some commitment by the gallery to document that experience and to have it written about. And again, you know, I seek the assistance of scholars to do that. Again, I've worked with Halima, Dr. Melanie Harvey at Howard University wrote the essay for the Africoba catalog. So there are ways in which it can be done. I think the important component is for artists to understand why it's so important that it's done. I think they're, you know, they get very excited about being in a show, but don't take a step back to kind of realize what else needs to happen beyond just hanging their work on the wall.
And Kayla, one thing I didn't want to forget too, there are so many new avenues. I met the young women who do Art Black. They're doing art criticism. There's Sugarcane Magazine. That's another online magazine. There's the Culture Type. So there are a lot of avenues for sharing and making sure you're putting your work out and letting groups like that know, because they're looking for content as well. And you know, what I do wouldn't be possible without what they do as well. So I try to keep in touch with folks who are doing publications and share what we're doing, and hopefully talk about what they're doing as well.
Okay, great. I'm sure that's a great start for a lot of artists, especially here in Indiana. We're kind of isolated in our little bubble, and it's hard to figure out where to reach out to. So for Kelly and Halima, do you have any suggestions for upcoming art historians or art writers that are looking to be published? I think that connecting people to one another is kind of vital to continuing all of our work.
Yeah, I'm the proponent, you know, for both sides of that question, for artists and art historians. I'm such a proponent of sending emails, you know, because that was something that was so helpful, you know, to me, you know, starting out. And I mean, and still, you know, in my career, it's like researching the people who, you know, for artists, I would say, you know, research the curators, you know, who are doing shows that interest you, right? Or who are doing shows of artists that may be in the same lane as you. You know, email that curator, you know, send them a couple of images. You know, you never know who will respond to you. You know what I mean? And one of the things about, that one of my professors, I love him, for saying this, to us when we were, first years. And it's like, whenever you're looking for something or looking to connect with something, someone, however, all you need is one. I think we feel like, you need to get 3 opportunities or 5 opportunities, to kind of have all these, you're kind of, to have multiple, streams, but sometimes, all you really need is one. And I think the same would go, for up and coming art historians, and curators. I can say I mentor students all over the country, grad students, as well as undergrad students, Latinx, Asian, and Black, and queer, oftentimes because I'm the only person that responds to them. Or like they're nervous, that if they send that email or if they make the phone call, or, they'll get laughed at or that kind of thing. And so I'm always, telling people, that when you're trying to, the best thing about, I think any career, is the relationships that you have and the relationships that you make. People invest in people. I don't think we talk about that enough, or we see that enough, particularly for up and coming professionals. But so much of my, success, and like Halima was saying earlier, like just being able to quit a job, super publicly, and still work, like I haven't, technically I haven't stopped working, I've just stopped working that particular job, and all of that, is because of, the relationships, that I've built and people that I just took a chance, and emailed or called up, because there's plenty of people who didn't call me back too. But for all the people, but I am standing here or sitting here with you right now because of all the people who did.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I think there's not much more that I would really add to it other than something that seems like really basic and common sense, but seems to be disappearing, and that is common courtesy and good manners when you are reaching out to people, and being comfortable in yourself, and being sincere, in your efforts and in your inquiry. I think that that's extremely important as you're reaching out to people, and because there are many people who will respond to sincerity as well as persistence, and I think that that's very important to add to what has already been stated. But I emphasize it because of just having been contacted by a lot of different people, and I'm always interested in being supportive and helpful, and I do make myself available. But what I've noticed is that you'll take the time with people sometimes, and they're not really as sincere about what they are contacting you about, and I find that just shocking. And you invest time, so because you want to help support and nurture and help the next generation of writers or curators, or advise artists and everything, and so some of the artists and curators and historians and writers, they're just looking at the short term or the immediacy of the moment and not realizing that there's a relationship that can be ongoing. So I think that that's also something to keep in mind, because you're we're all growing and we're evolving, and hopefully we'll all keep learning something until rigor mortis sets in. um, but it's about long-term relationship building, and we're all changing and evolving, and as are our younger people or students. And the nice thing about these interactions is that there's an exchange, and we can learn really exciting and wonderful things about ourselves and each other, or get different perspectives that are essential to continue all of our work. But sincerity and good manners and being one's authentic self in the work is really important.
Great. Anyone else have anything to add? I think that perfectly kind of summed it up and gives us a nice kind of way to lead out for today. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. And I look forward to talking to you all again soon.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
for having us.
You, Kayla.
Thanks. I don't know how to...
Pigment International and the DeSable Museum of African American History, in association with New Day Culture, present the second annual Black Fine Art Month celebration under the theme, A Woman's Work. A month-long virtual experience celebrates Black women making profound contributions in the fine arts arena. It features weekly panel discussions with art world luminaries exploring the contemporary Black aesthetic and a virtual exhibition. For full details, visit blackfineartmonth.com. That's blackfineartmonth.com.